And today's webinar is all about improving your monitoring. It's going to be working with Dan Sievers.
Hello.
You see, Dan, do you want to just sort of share where you're from?
I'm Dan Sievers. I'm a content marketing officer from TalkWalker, which is a social media analytics company based in Luxembourg, but we do have offices in New York, San Francisco, Europe, and beyond. So.
Great. Thanks very much. So I thought it was a really good idea to work with Dan because he is an expert in monitoring. For any of you that are Coverage Book users, you'll know that we don't cover monitoring. Once you come to Coverage Book, it's to build and design your report ready to send on to stakeholders and clients. But monitoring is such an important part of the workflow. Without coverage, where are we in PR? So it's really proving the success. So it can be one of those points in PR where we sort of set up monitoring and then we just leave it, but we always know that it can be refreshed. So today we want to run through, it'll be quite a short and sharp, helpful webinar. We're going to run through 5 points, and each of those 5 points will really help you if you're either looking to refresh your monitoring service, looking to tighten it up, or about to start a new campaign, or even if you're mid-campaign and you know that you're missing some clips. I'm sure that some of our tips can really help all of those areas. So without further ado, we'll get cracking. I'm just going to share my screen. Also, if people have any problems with hearing or seeing either of us or the screen, please just let us know in the chat and we should get alerted to that. But hopefully you can hear and see us okay. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got 5 areas that we're going to be moving through today. So the first one, we want to be looking at making sure that you choose the right tool. There are a lot of media monitoring organisations and services out there. Obviously, Dan is from TalkWalker, but we're going to be looking at a real variety to make sure it's right for you. And also, we're going to be looking at selecting the right search terms, because I know that when I was agency side working on campaigns, sometimes we can fall victim to just putting in the campaign name or because it's the brand name, and actually need to open up so much more if you really want to ensure not missing a clip. So Dan's going to be sharing some brilliant tips there that are great for, obviously perfect for TalkWalker, but could potentially be used in other tools too, which is great. Third area around timing. So timing in when you set this up, but also timing in how you get alerted is crucial. The key to collection, so this is how you're bringing in your clips. Got some good tips there. And then finally, this actually relates to a webinar that I did recently about keeping your data clean once you actually have your clips and all in the tracker. So yeah, they're the 5 points, and let's get cracking. So choosing the right tool is super important. This is an obvious point, but it's something to just really bear in mind when we are planning out our campaigns and looking at how much time we're allocating to different areas of our campaign. I know that in the past we would get the project signed off by a client, and then we'll dive straight into a small part of planning, maybe looking at influencer lists, and be straight into activation. And we never used to plan enough time in setting up our monitoring and ensuring we had the right search terms. And it's just so important because, you know, if you don't have all of your clips, you're potentially missing out on your KPI targets. And that's just something to just really remember. I think it's maybe have this sort of around us in the office, so when you're about to hit your campaign, you just know that, you know, one clip could be whether you hit your targets or not. So it's so essential to build in that time right at the beginning to set this up properly. Also, sometimes we may just have one monitoring service for everything we do. So we might be in a department where we're looking at a few different verticals, and we might have that and just one monitoring service. I would say try not to do that. It might be okay if you have your main one, but I would always look at at least sort of reviewing what other ones are out there and the services that are out there at the start of a particular campaign, because other elements of that campaign, it might not fit within that particular monitoring service. So ask yourself these questions when you're about to go into that. So why are you monitoring? This might seem very simple, but who has set that out as an objective to monitor? What are you monitoring? Are you monitoring a piece of content? Are you monitoring the pickup of a press release? Are you monitoring for crisis? Are you monitoring for the links for SEO within your coverage? There's so many different reasons of why you'd monitor, and that really does flow into how you choose and set up your monitoring. Also following on from that, what is the content and media channel that is important to your client and your campaign? Again, this can really vary with how you choose your service that you use. And just really do consider all options and also test them. There's some really good freemium models on some monitoring services, but also I'd at least trial, even if they're paid, because you won't know if they're right for you until you get to test them for what you're particularly working on. And also, you may have come across this webinar because we recently released a blog post that was looking at different monitoring services. And lots of get recommended all of the time in the PR industry. But what I would say is one size doesn't fit all. So just because you've been recommended a monitoring service by a colleague, it might be amazing for them, but you could have a very different looking campaign and objective. There's a very different style of content, and you have a very different set of KPIs that have been set by the stakeholders, and maybe that monitoring service might not capture and be right for that. So make sure it's you or your team testing it for your actual needs. So just focusing on that a little bit more on why are you monitoring, I just sort of put down some of these different areas that I know that I've monitored for in the past. I mean, this could probably be built out even more. This is sort of based on some of my experience. But it just sort of really brings home that how different your needs and objectives can be. And it's really good to just make sure you're setting this out really clearly, either at the beginning of a client setup, if you're agency side, or a project or campaign setup, because it's just to be really clear about what your objectives are, so you can then just double check that your monitoring service can help you with some of these areas, and it's the best one for the job as well. So just starting on the right side, crisis. So there are some departments that are absolutely focused on crisis alone and don't sort of do proactive campaign management, but monitoring for crisis is going to be absolutely probably the key part of that area of the role. So you're going to be needing alerts that are as it happens, and really be able to open out those alerts for all types of different brand mentions, but also the sentiment's going to be super important. So some tools you'll find are stronger in some of those areas than others. So that's sort of one example. Also, if you're doing sort of media monitoring or daily clips kind of style job on a daily basis for some clients or within a team, you might not only just be looking at your own brand, but you might also be looking at industry news and looking at brand comparison and things like that. Again, just test the different monitoring services for your particular role and your particular job to make sure that they can match up to what you need. Campaign mentions, again, this could be all sorts. This might not just be words, it might be images within your campaign. And I know that Dan's going to be talking about that in a little bit more detail. Again, not all tools offer that. So just work out what's right for your particular campaign. Maybe you're selling in a big sort of lead campaign image that's led by photography with some celebrities or something. Whatever it might be, that's going to be really important. So you'd want to make sure that your monitoring service has that as a feature. Social opinion, again, and also these sort of points towards the left side of social opinion, content tracking, SEO links, they might not be, when you're monitoring for those kind of things, they might not be in for the job of reporting a client as it happens, or daily or even weekly. This might be the kind of monitoring that might be feeding into insights, and therefore you might not need the updates as frequently as some of the others. So yeah, you'd want to be checking that with your service. And also right at the end there, look, I've mentioned SEO links because, as some of you will know, it's an area that I used to work in. Again, not all monitoring services will look to see whether there are links going to your client's content within your coverage. A lot of them do, not all. So if that's a new objective that's been set by your client, I know that this is an objective that's coming up more and more recently. I know from some of the customers at Coverage Book. So yeah, double check if that's a feature. Again, with content tracking, there's some tools that specialize in that. BuzzSumo is really good at looking at whether a piece of content has been shared or not, and that they strengthen more in that area than other areas. So again, just really think about what's the objective of your client, your campaign, and then check the features and work with your teammates on that. So sort of following on from that and really focusing on your campaign, really think about the content channel that you are sort of pushing within your campaign. Now, often it's a real mix. If it's a big sort of national or even international PR campaign, you're most likely going to be looking at offline and TV, radio, online articles. You'll probably have a social element to it too. You may well have some owned content that you're trying to push out, and therefore you really will want to be looking at a monitoring service that does look at all of that. You might also want to bring in some specialists as well, because if you have that and you also have an objective of tracking links, you might also want to bring in something like Moz on top of a full service. But I think it's just good to really think about this, which is why I would say don't just have a monitoring service for all of your clients or for one of your clients and that's it. By campaign, just spend the time to sit and think about that particular campaign objective. Think about the components within that activity and then the style of content that you're going to be pushing. Is it just a press release that's going to be news-led? Does it have a social element, as I said? Is there content that needs to be owned content that needs to be pushed and tracked? There are all different elements that you need to make sure that your monitoring service can handle. So what I've done here is just pop down, I mean, this doesn't sort of show the whole spectrum of monitoring tools out there, but it's a real good start for your research. But you've got there in the top left-hand corner, as an example, TVIs, critical mention. Obviously, they are really specialists in broadcast and TV, and particularly in the US. I mean, they do go into other countries as well. But, you know, if you're doing a TV campaign, go with those because they're going to be bringing back the best quality. But then you can start to move into something like Google Alerts. Google Alerts is fantastic if you have a lot of online articles going live. I would say if you're going to be fully social, you'd want to be looking at something like Brandwatch or another mix. Talkwalker, we've got them in the middle because they really do go over a lot of these different areas. And I guess Dan is probably best to give a little bit of background there.
Yeah, so we have sort of four main aspects of the business. We do have the full Talkwalker analytics tool, which does cover sort of channel monitoring, social media monitoring. We also monitor press, TV, radio. So that's our big tool. We also have Quick Search, which is a slightly more accessible one that gives 13 months of back data. But then also with you mentioning Google Alerts, we have an equivalent called Talkwalker Alerts, which is a similar tool, but it also monitors mentions on Twitter. And that's a free tool, as well as our Free Search, which is a freemium version of our Quick Search. So we've got a couple of free tools that people can use as well.
Great options. I guess that's one thing to mention as well, that a lot of these, they're not all fully paid tools. They do sometimes have the free options, as Talkwalker does, that Dan just mentioned. So it's good to try out the free one. But I mean, you could, for some campaigns, you'll be fine just using the free version. It could answer what you need. If they are a paid one, I just recommend using the trials and having a walkthrough. But I would, rather than just sort of seeing a demo, where you can, really do try and trial the tool before you get started, because as I mentioned right at the beginning, one size doesn't fit all, and every campaign is completely different. So just make sure it's right for you. If there's any questions for these, because I know we mentioned a few different areas here, especially on the SEO side on the right, might be new to some of you, just drop the questions in the Q&A. We'll get to those after. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Dan, because he's going to be helping us out with our searches.
Okay, I'll just open the slides, 2 seconds. So I just wanted to give people a flavor of what you can do with social media monitoring. Like I was discussing earlier, one of our aspects that we have is the TalkWalker free social search. So if people have never really experienced social media monitoring before, this would access you can search any term word you're interested in, and you'll get 7 days worth of data. So all the mentions regarding that across various social media networks gives people an idea of what is available. And then if there is an interest in there, we then can go on to quick search, which goes into 13 months worth of back data. Now, for some of these examples, I've used our main TalkWalker analytics tools, but a lot of the suggestions here you can also use within our free search and quick search tools as well. Now, one of the big things that it's worth looking at when you're looking into your social media monitoring is never underestimate how well consumers can spell. So, for example, a bigger brand as McDonald's, 2 examples that I found is the right way of spelling it and the wrong way of spelling it. And we found 4,500 mentions of McDonald's spelt incorrectly just in 1 week, which is a huge amount. It's about 1% of McDonald's mentions in that same period. So if you were monitoring that as a business, you would be missing 1% of your mentions just because of those people misspelling your product name. And again, if you think there'll be different spellings again without the apostrophes, various other spellings as well. So, sorry, I'm just seeing a message come through.
It's fine. I was just encouraging everyone to ask questions.
Cool. Sorry. So it's always worth just checking the spellings, looking at your different spelling options as you go through. One thing that we have got as well is emoji analysis. Don't forget that a lot of consumers are using emojis now to express opinions and express emotions. One of my favorite examples is the thinking emoji. Often it's a great example of people as demonstrating they're moving along the buying cycle. So when you look for your brand name alongside the thinking emoji, that you'll find that people are in the consideration phase of a product. So you can see what people are thinking about that product, you can see what they're comparing it to. Often you'll find it alongside, should it be PlayStation or should it be Xbox? Also, for example, iPhone or Android, and you'll see that same emoji. So you can look into the emojis and the emotions behind what people are doing. So I find like emoji analysis it's really informative once you dig a bit deeper with that. Image recognition is one of the things we have that's sort of a bit more bespoke to us. So image detection helps you find the brand mentions that don't mention your keyword. So we've got an AI aspect to our tool, which allows us to detect brand logos. So for example, in this case, this was an image from Instagram that was detected. There was no mention of McDonald's anywhere in the text. It was just the image that was picked up. And this is, again, we found 1,500 images containing the McDonald's logo alone. So no brand mentions, just the logo. And that, again, helps you protect your brand. In this case, would you want your brand to be associated with drug use? And also the other area is copyright infringement. So if you have a protected logo, we can help, you can, using image recognition, you can detect any copyright infringements. And then from there, you can go as far as you like with your Booleans. A lot of the different Booleans we use, some of them are industry standard. You could even use them just on Google. Others are a little bit bespoke to us, but you'll probably find that similar businesses will have their own similar results, if not word for word. For example, one of the recent projects I was working on was looking at earnings calls. And one of my companies that I was looking at was Macy's. So what I did with this Boolean is I've got the different spellings to make sure I've covered all the different aspects of people typing or people with fat fingers getting the wrong letters. And also the key topics around that. So the FTSE 500 short code. Jeff Gennett is the CEO. So all the very important people that would probably turn up in the earnings call mentions. And I've also used the near 5 Boolean, which will find mentions of, in this case, finance or reports near my other keywords. So I can start getting an idea of where the conversation is happening and really narrow it down. You'll also notice the asterisks in Financ or at the end. That will help find any related words to finance. So finance, finances, financial, anything like that. It sort of speeds up the process and means you can make sure you're not missing the words that are related to your topic. Just talking about the near Boolean, this is one of my favorites. Is again, I've used it here for consumer intent, but you can use it for various other aspects. So say you were a shoe company, you wanted to know what the consumer intent is related to shoes. The near Boolean can detect mentions of I want and shoes in the same sentence, in that order, within 3 words of each other. So in the middle of that sentence, there could be a brand name, there could be a color name, it could be anything related to them. And in this case, I started to see mentions of Balenciaga, Prada, Versace, Gucci. So I could see that people's aspirations are and demands are which brands they're looking at. And it gives brands an idea of what people's aspirations and where their brand sits with those aspirations as well. And that's just using the near Boolean. And then one other one I like to use that's I think is interesting to people is author description. So say you are interested in a specific target market and what their interests are, or what their interests or hobbies or anything that they're currently looking at. So for example, in this case, I used author description jogger. So that would find anyone that has the word jogger in their Twitter bio or Instagram bio. And so these are the people that were specifically interested in jogging. And then by looking at those results, I could look at the brands that those people are talking about. So now I can see which running shoes that people that really interested in jogging are discussing. So you can really narrow down the people that you want to talk to and listen to the conversations that they're having about your product. So that's another great example of a sneaky way of just narrowing down your results and getting the search target that you want. So I know there's a few different examples there. I know that there's a few simpler ones and it starts getting more complex. But like the thing is with social media monitoring is the more time you spend getting your Boolean right, your search terms right at the start, the more the more time you save in the long run. So I think that's there's just a few inspirations there, but I can always give you some more ideas at the end. So, shall I pass back?
Yes, thank
Cool.
you.
Okay.
I think that's a really interesting point, just right at the end that you made there, just about the fact that this isn't just for monitoring your coverage clips and putting them into a report. So you can gain some really amazing insights for your brand. But I think as well, to that point that we made at the beginning about building enough time in at the start of the campaign to set all of this up. This can really help with influence the target lists as well, I guess, as well as sort of brand insights. Ashley's just asked a question about whether the slides will be available after the presentation.
Yeah, that's no problem. I can share those. No worries.
Excellent. And also just to remind everybody that if you wanted to share any of this with your co-workers, the recording will be available too. We'll send you a link. Cool. Okay, I'm going to take back and go back to my slides. Hopefully you can see all of that. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to look at 5 ways. So we've looked at 2 already. The third one is around timing. Because it's super important. So building the setup time is really, really important. At the beginning, I've mentioned that a couple of times now, so sorry to repeat myself, but obviously I find it's an important point. The reason for that is because I don't know if any of you have tried, but trying to look back at coverage that you've achieved in the past is quite difficult, first of all, and also it can just be quite inaccurate as well. You're not going to get back every single clip. If you have everything set up from the start of the campaign, so you're bringing in your mentions and alerts as it happens, it's just going to be much more thorough, and you're going to make sure that you've collected it all, and you'll be able to organise it and collate all of those clips a lot easier as well than trying to sort of go back in the past. So make sure you build in that time in your planning when you're organising your activity. But also, not just in terms of timing and planning to do the setup, but also the timing of how you bring in your alerts. You can choose those options when you're setting up your media monitoring service. So again, look at the objective of why you're using this service. And then consider what kind of how you want to be updated in your alert times. So just going back to this sort of spectrum of objectives that I had before, right at the end there, remember I was talking about whether you're using these insight tools, monitoring tools for insight, if you're looking at tracking content, or you're looking at social opinion because you're sort of doing a research project, or you're looking at SEO links over time. Maybe you're looking at that on a monthly basis, or quarterly. It doesn't have to be sort of this as it happened alerts immediately. And so just if you're thinking about that as insight time, set that, because otherwise you're going to have as it happened mentions, or as you get a new link every single time to a piece of popular content. You don't want your whole inbox sort of really full with these alerts. So just associate the right kind of timing on the alerts. When moving along, maybe you're just looking at doing your monitoring at the time of reporting. Sometimes if you have a client on retainer and you're just doing a monthly report and it's not and it's press office, maybe there's not an active campaign going, your client might just suggest a monthly report. So just set that up so you're having that sort of come through at the right times. Obviously, if you're at the other end of the arrows there and you're looking at brand reputation or industry news because you're circulating that to stakeholders, or even more so with crisis, you're going to need You're going to need to know those updates immediately as soon as it goes live. So just make sure you select the right kind of frequency of alert within your monitoring service for your kind of job to be done. So yeah, any kind of crisis, you need to have those alerts immediately coming through to your inbox. So moving on from there, actually bringing in, once you get alerted and you've got those clips in your inbox, what are you doing with them? So that key to collection. So as I mentioned, you will be getting these alerts from your monitoring service going into your inbox. And now, whether you have them as it happens, or on a daily basis at the end of the day, or weekly or monthly, or however you set up the frequency, it's still important to manage those alerts within your email box for a number of reasons. So first of all, if you're working on a really busy campaign and you've got all of these alerts dropping into your inbox, first of all, it could get quite messy and crowded, and you might miss an important email because you've got lots of these. You might miss an important email from a journalist or a client. That's a problem. But also, if it's just going into your inbox, and every PR has a busy inbox, you might, by mistake, delete one of those alerts, and that could be a real key alert. It could be an alert to a crisis piece, a negative piece that you need to jump on. or it could be a lead piece of coverage that you might miss. And remember, if you're missing clips, you might be missing KPIs. So don't just have the messages dropping into your inbox. So a really simple tip, just make sure you're managing your emails. Do an apply rule. You might be doing this already, but it's worth just setting up different folders for your different clients, campaigns, even by search term, I would say, because then you can separate out your sort of crisis or negative comments to a different live campaign that might have different search terms that might be proactive. It's just going to make your jobs a lot easier when you're updating your trackers, updating your clients, and also building out your measurement reports as well. So simple tip, but make sure you set that up at the beginning. Once you then have your clips, you want to then go and find them and capture them. Often with monitoring services, they do provide a clip, so that's great, but quite often as well, you're just getting a link. So you need to go over to the site and grab that image yourself. If you're not a Coverage Book customer, you might not know that you can do that with Coverage Book. You can use our free trial to test that out. And if you are a Coverage Book customer, you might not know about our Chrome plugin. This is really helpful in gaining some clips and screen grabs. If they don't come through automatically in the tool, you can use that tool as well to go and do image capture. It's really useful. Also, once you have your piece of coverage and you know that this is definitely a piece of coverage that needs to be circulated within your team, there's some really good highlighter tools out there. There's a real variety on Chrome. I've used one called Highly before, and even if it's just for your own benefit of just making sure you know where your brand mentions are or your campaign name, or a spokesperson name, you might just want to highlight that on the page, and it can be really useful. So real simple, don't forget the Control F tool on your keyboard, but Control F, which is Control Find, pop in your brand name, then it's there, and then you can highlight it, which just makes things a lot easier when you're then recording into your trackers. And yes, do have a tracker. If you don't have one, it's really, really important to just get all of these mentions out of your email form and into an organized area. So often trackers will be in Excel. I do recommend Excel for coverage trackers, mainly because you can organize your data a lot easier, and you can draw out insights very easy then when you're at the measurement stage of your activity. And yeah, often you could be all sorts of information that you can include in here. I say, even though it might take a little bit longer when you're recording, try and record as much as possible. So things like your article title, the author name, metrics of that, or social share, mainly, all those really, really important, not only measurement, drawing out insights, but also building future media lists and things like that. And really, without a tracker, you can't really draw out insights for full measurement at the end. So do really try to keep that up to date. Also, again, if you find that is just taking up far too much time to keep a tracker up to date, you can use Coverage Book. It is a point, and actually, even if you're a Coverage Book customer, you might not realise that this area is here. So in the top right-hand corner, you can see there's a tab called Insights. This is essentially every piece of coverage that's been added to a client folder within Coverage Book, and it's got every clip and all of the information there. So it's got the screen grab, it's got all of the metrics, and then the book that it belongs to as well. And again, you can draw insights from here, and it's searchable. So it's essentially sort of your online tracker without having to manually keep it up to date. So really important to have that once your clips are through. Then moving on from there, you might be really pleased with your tracker. So you've set up your monitoring, you've got all your clips in, you've got your Excel spreadsheet, and that's great. And you might then not have to worry about it until the end of your campaign. But if you have a very busy campaign and there's lots of data being inputted on a daily basis, and maybe by more than one person, some of that data, there is danger of that data not being clean. And what I mean by that is that especially if you have a mix of monitoring tools, they may be using different data points. Now, this is a really important point because this has happened. I've spoke to quite a few PRs where this mistake has happened actually, where they've used a couple of different data tools, and then within their tracker, the metric for a particular publication is a different data source to the other. So I'm going to go into an example to explain it a little bit more. So here's a dirty data disaster. And I actually shared this in a recent webinar, but I wanted to just bring it up again because it's really important when you're thinking about monitoring tools. So this particular example, two team members were keeping the trackers up to date. But they had their clips and they were recording it, but they both went to different services to go and check the metrics. And so they put in different metrics for the same publication. So what happened was that the total audience reach figure was actually incorrect at the end. And then what happened was that the client kind of lost trust in their measurement. So let's just see how it happened. So one of the team members went to Volcana to check the HuffPost figure, and they use monthly unique browsers. You can see that it's just under 6 million. And first of all, I'd just say, like, I do have a preference of what tool I would use for my metrics, but there's no sort of wrong or right. It's up to you guys and which one is right for you and what you agree with your client and what kind of metrics you use. But it has to be consistent. That's the point. So this particular person went to Volcano, which in the US is Cision. But then another team member went to SimilarWeb. And you can see here that the number is vastly different because it's a different data point, and they're looking at a different set of data to the monthly browsers that Cision are using. Neither are sort of wrong or right, but you just have to agree right at the start with your clients and ensure that all of the team members are sure that which data point you're using and that it's consistent. So you can see here that when it goes into the tracker, it's going to be the right one. So yeah, be consistent with tools and data, decide on that right at the beginning, make sure that your stakeholders are involved in the decision and they are happy, and then brief all team members, even if it's beyond just the people updating the tracker, and it's likely that somebody else is going to be involved in the measurement later on, so they'll need to be able to just keep an eye on whether that's wrong or right. And on that point, I think that it's to wait to the end of the campaign to see whether that data is wrong or right. You're going to make a mistake, because if you've got hundreds of pieces of coverage in an Excel spreadsheet, the human eye is not going to be able to see like one number being inconsistent with another. So make sure that there's like regular checks on that. Another thing to just watch out for when you have your clips coming in from monitoring tools is just ensuring that there is a human eye doing some filtering as well, because it's brilliant that we can cast the net wide and bring in as many clips as possible, but often they might not be the right ones. So something that could happen is that you add all of the clips that come in from a monitoring tool to a tracker without sort of checking to see whether it was associated to your particular campaign. Now, the problems with that is you could potentially end up reporting on coverage that another agency secured, it wasn't yours, which could cause some friction. But also you might then have non-campaign clips. So you might be bringing in some of Dan's examples, a misspelling or something. You might have a clip in there that's got nothing to do with your campaign, but it has the same search term. You need to check them, and somebody needs to check that before it just goes straight into a tracker. There are ways that you can pull, so especially with Google Alerts, for example, there's ways that you can set up an RSS feed for Google Alerts, which brings it straight into a Google Sheet. That is brilliant in saving time to essentially have a tracker made for you, but you have to be aware that everything's going to go into that. So a human who's involved in the campaign does need to double check that. So just make sure there's enough time for team members to do that. Because if you have non-campaign clips in there, not only is it not very useful for anybody in the measurement part, but also it's going to really skew your figures too. So your measurement's going to be incorrect. which again, you're going to lose trust with your stakeholders and your client. And also, if you're sort of reporting on other agencies' work, of course, you're going to be damaging relationships there. So you want to avoid that. As I mentioned, it's really easy to do this because look at this inbox. It's absolutely full of coverage book mentions, which is great. Our brand is being talked about, but some of those might not be relevant. I don't want to put all of those into a report and send it around to all of my team. I want to make sure that it's absolutely relevant. And they're all about us, and they're not just about coverage books, which it could be. So really important to check that. So how can you avoid it? Just ensure there's consistency, again, with the team members. Organise your tracker document so you can check all of those points. Use your own trackers. I know that sometimes there are ones provided by monitoring services. I would still suggest having your own as well, because you still need that human eye of somebody who's involved in the campaign and knows the brand inside out to know whether it's the right one or not. As I mentioned, automated RSS feeds can be great to start you off with your tracker, but make sure you're just reviewing it and filtering as well. And just make sure you're doing frequent checks on all of those trackers and the numbers so you can avoid those disasters. So that kind of brings us to a close of our 5 areas to focus on if you're either revising, reviewing, or setting up your monitoring from the start. So hopefully they've been really helpful. But just as a recap on some of the points that we've gone through, be confident to use a mix of tools and be open to sort of trying different ones and trying those free ones, and definitely do that at the beginning. And don't, just because you use one sort of large monitoring service and you're paying a lot for them, don't feel like that they are going to answer every single objective. They may do, but just double check that, because you might find that having another smaller free tool alongside your big monitoring tool is really going to help you out with not missing a clip, because that's what you want to avoid, missing those clips. This is a really important one that Dan wanted to just remind everyone at the end. It's like, I'd say it's probably the most important. Spend time on the query at the start, because it saves time at the end. And so, I mean, that sort of relates to your search query, but also the setup time. You're going to be saving so much time if you sort of plan this properly right at the beginning. Again, timing is everything. So not just with planning, but also on how you're setting up the frequency of your alerts. And then the collection of your clips is just as important as the discovery. Often we forget that. We think, well, let's set up the monitoring service. We've got that, that's ticked. Okay, let's start with the activation. You really do need to focus on that filtering process, and then that sort of tracking as well, because you can see where it can go wrong. And then finally, making sure that your data is clean, because if you don't have the right kind of metrics in there, then you can completely skew all of your measurement, and it could almost like make all of your results pointless. I mean, you don't want that. So make sure that data is clean. So that brings us to a close. So if anyone has any questions, please let us know. We're going to see if there are any. Stop sharing. Okay. Okay. I think that's it. So people have asked if they can have access to the slides. We've said yes. So what we will do is, along with a link to the recording, we'll just pop in a link to the deck as well. So Dan and I will organise that outside, and we'll send that to you. And I think, yeah, all 3 of you have asked that, so that's fine. Great. Okay. I don't think there's any more questions. No. Dan, is there anything that you want to add?
No, I just thanks for having us and letting us be part of this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. If you do think of any questions afterwards, feel free to tweet us or send them in. My Twitter handle is @Stella Bayles, or you can do @CoverageBooks as well. Dan, what's yours?
It's @TW Dan Sievers.
Great. So yeah, feel free to get involved in the conversation. Also look out for our next content coming up. So I'm going to be hosting a podcast series soon, and so I'm just doing some really exciting interviews with some people that are going to really help with the PR workflow, and also just dispel some myths of some of the things that we hear about some of the future of PR. So just look out for that, and I'll be tweeting about it soon. But yes, thank you all very much, and we'll follow up with an email. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.